I hope you'll agree with me that if you believe the truth of what you just saw, that we have a fundamental crisis in American education. What makes it a little bit worse is that the presentation that you just saw was the 2006 version. I suggest to you that were it done in 2008, those statistics would be even more alarming. Where are we and how do we get here educationally in the United States? You know, it's very interesting that the United States is one of the first countries, if not the first, to commit itself to universal public education. And the public education system was designed at that point in time, and therefore the commitment to local control of education was a foregone conclusion. The beginnings of a national input into the education process, oddly enough, began in the very early 50s when the Eisenhower administration decided that the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States should include the phrase "under God." And the reason for that inclusion, some of you may not know, is because it was a way of reminding our children that they were living in a country that had religion when the godless communists did not. And so the addition of the term "under God" in our Pledge of Allegiance was a political decision, not a theological one. From that point, our involvement on a national level in education increased. In the Kennedy administration, we had for the first time a cabinet-level secretary for health, education, and welfare, all lumped together. The first one, oddly enough, was the former governor of Connecticut, the state that I come from, Governor Ribicoff, who some of you may remember from the 1968 presidential convention when he pointed at the mayor of Chicago and said if it were not for the police in Chicago, we would not have a police riot practicing Gestapo tactics on the streets of Chicago. And President Ribicoff went on to separate the Department of Education from Health, Education, and Welfare, and we now have a cabinet secretary for education. This process has continued in small and not particularly obvious ways over the years, including such things as Head Start, which was mandated by the federal government. The individuals with deficiencies in Education Act, the government's love of acronyms translates to IDEA, but the whole purpose was to require the states, without actually funding them to do it, to provide an equal educational opportunity for disabled, intellectually disabled students. I suggest to you that IDEA has not been a colossal success because it is very expensive and the federal government has not funded it. They leave it to the states to fund, and obviously state budgets are severely strained, and the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, unfortunately, has not been the help to individuals with disabilities that were needed and thought of at the time when that legislation was proposed. But in any event, the whole idea of the government's role, the federal government's role, in involving itself in the educational process was for national security purposes. And I suppose the best indication of that is the No Child Left Behind program of President Bush, which indicated that the focus of education in America should be on math, science, and English, with less focus on English other than basic communication skills, and more focus on learning the basics of math and science. Well, on its face, that sounds like a pretty good idea, except the problem is that we live in a computer age. And that computer age enables any one of us, however literate or illiterate we may be, and however gifted or ungifted we may be, to go into that computer and find the ability to solve any math problem, virtually any science issue that needs to be researched and learned can be learned as needed with the help of a computer. And so with this focus on No Child Left Behind, the fact is the whole country has been left behind, because the courses that are being put to the side are courses such as civics, social studies, history, geography, the kinds of things that I believe students are going to need much more fundamentally to deal with a world in which they are invested, not simply in the borders of their town or their state or indeed the United States. We are living in an international environment, and that international environment will require an understanding, a basic, fundamental understanding of our history, as I believe it is axiomatic that it is true that those who do not learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them, and an informed citizenry is the finest and most educated bulwark against history repeating itself, because they will then have the empowerment to know who they should elect, what issues are important, what things we should be doing, and more importantly, perhaps, what things we should not, both as a nation and as individuals. So we now find ourselves in a rather incongruous situation educationally, because as education has become fundamentally more important in the roles of our children's lives, the ability of their parents to influence that educational process has been substantially diminished over time. When I was growing up, of course, I had a mother who lived at home. My father worked, as I'm sure happened with many of you. And the fact is that a parent was usually available 24/7 to guide that child through his homework, make sure it got done, make sure that he was home on time, and the list goes on. Unfortunately, we now live in a world where both parents are employed, we have latchkey children, and unfortunately, the milieu that a child needs to feel that education is more important, not less, is being diminished rather than encouraged, because of the fact that their parents have less of a role in that educational process, and yet the schools are not picking up the slack. And so you have this substantial disconnect between what education is and what I believe education ought to be.